I'm trying to show that verbs are not random, right? That they have an intrinsic meaning that they're bringing to the verb, the full verb. So this is what linguistic theory has found. I'm showing what linguistic theoreticians have been identifying, as well as psycholinguists and others have been identifying as kind of themes here of what the meaning that these verbs are contributing. How do we teach that is the question. And I don't really have an answer here. I'm not going towards an answer, but I'm just putting it forth that there is a difference that we should be teaching to the students. Instead of rote memory learning of all the verbs and their meanings, there's actually patterns that they can capture to help them in that learning process. So there is a logic to it. There's an underlying logic, but it's not very obvious mostly. It's clearly not obvious because we've been spending decades studying it in linguistics. But it is not random, and it relates, as I'll show a little bit, it relates to the meaning, or rather the light verb contributes to the meaning of the full verb. And also it relates to the syntax or the structure. So how many arguments does a verb have, right? It relates to the choice of the light verb. But if you look at grammar books, there's a couple examples, but there's a lot. Most grammar, I haven't seen any that goes beyond what I'm going to show. So most grammar books just define what compound verbs are in Persian, and then they give specific examples. And usually the examples sometimes are not even classified with different light verb types. And then most of the time is spent on discussing how to conjugate the light verb constructions or the compound verbs. Some of them may classify the verbs based on the preverb. So you can say, okay, you have nouns as a preverb before the verb, or an adjective or a preposition, or maybe even compound noun like dastopazadan is a compound noun. But there is no real categorization in terms of meaning or linguistic behavior that can capture these compound verbs and explain them in a way that captures the patterns that we're seeing, that you can know exactly, like we just did, know exactly which verb should go there, right? So that's I put there the problem. I added the problem there. So patterns are not described in traditional grammar books. They're not in textbooks for either Heritage Persian or L2 speakers. If you know of any books that do more than this, please let me know, because I may have missed it, but I haven't seen any. And of course, linguists have been working on this, but linguistic publications, we write with it's full of linguistic jargon, and it's theory focused. So it's not easy to understand if you're not a linguist, and there's no way to go and bring it into your classroom and apply it directly. So I'm going to focus on the compound verbs as my practical example to show what I'm promoting in terms of an integrated approach to teaching different elements, different phenomena of the language. So in terms of compound verbs, there's been a lot of work on compound verbs from all these various domains that you can see here. So let me start with formal linguistics, because that's where I've been focused on mostly in the beginning when I was working on compound verbs. And there's been decades now, a couple of decades of work at least, really understanding the various contributions of the light verb and the preverb, and I'll talk about it a little bit, and understanding what the different groupings are and what their different meanings are and what meaning the light verb is contributing. Then there is some work on language acquisition research. There's still more to be done for Persian, but there's been some work on understanding how compound verbs are understood or learned by either heritage learners or native speakers. But a lot of this work still is lacking. The groupings, like testing them by different groups, that hasn't been done. It's been done more generally as a whole. But there's some publications in that domain, in the language acquisition research domain, and experimental approaches. And then natural language processing has been working on Persian now. It started originally in United States, ironically, the study of Persian as in natural language processing. But then Iran, especially Iranian universities, have really taken off and have been doing great work in developing corpora and resources, but also doing a lot of automated approaches to parsing Persian text and speech as well, and also various software, statistical software, and other tools that can be used for the analysis of Persian language automatically. So there's a lot of work there that has really taken off the last, I don't know, 20 years, maybe. And then I have two more domains, which is the cognitive I put cognitive linguistics. I really mean psycholinguistics actually here. But in the psycholinguistics domain, there's been some work as well on, as Pune's work, for instance, on compound verbs and the processing of the verbs in our minds. And finally, corpus linguistics, which I'm going to spend a bit more time on in this lecture, where we have, as I mentioned already, we've had a number of corpora developed for Persian, but there's also a lot of tools that can be used that can be brought into the classroom to help the students learn with authentic text. So there's all of these various approaches there on Persian language, specifically in the compound verbs in this case, but they're not really talking to each other or leveraging each other's work. And I put this here from Jason Rotman at the University of Florida. I found this is exactly how I feel, that there's a palpable disconnect between linguistic theory, formal empirical acquisition research, and pedagogical practice, I'll add, and natural language processing work, corpus linguistic and natural language processing work as well. So this is what I'm trying to push for then, is a more of an integrative approach. So integrate insights from all these various approaches of research and linguistic theory, as well as the corpus-driven work that has been done into the Persian language teaching curriculum. And I'm not suggesting this as a replacement for any framework, pedagogical framework. This is not a pedagogical framework in that sense, because it can be combined, this integration can be combined with any existing approaches that are there. And it's not really new if you think about it, in the sense that it's building on previous approaches. There's already a DDL, there's lots of literature on DDL, data-driven learning with corpus linguistics. There is a guided discovery technique approach already for grammar teaching. So it's kind of combining all of those in a way and integrating it for Persian language. So let me go now delve deeper into compound verbs and show how these can be leveraged, these insights that I'm talking about, from formal linguistics and second language acquisition. I don't want to go into what they are, but here it is in case you want to know. But the empirical work that has been done in second language acquisition, as well as theoretical work in formal linguistics, and the work that has been done in language processing, in psycholinguistics of compound verbs, how we can bring all of these together, perhaps. And I'm not going to really give a curriculum here. Now, I just want to bring together the various approaches and the insights that have been found, and we can talk about how we can bring it together, perhaps, as part of the discussion. So I already mentioned, so in linguistic theory, there's been a lot of work on compound verbs. It's a fascinating topic from the linguistic point of view. So compound verbs in general, or complex predicates as they're called, but also in Persian specifically. In fact, a lot of Persian complex predicates are so interesting that a lot of Europeans and Americans are working on it now. So the main questions there are really, what does each part contribute to the meaning of the full verb? So what does the light verb give in terms of meaning? What does the noun give, etc.? There's a continuum in the meaning. So you have very idiomatic verbs that you can't really split up the meaning by just, saying kutah amadan, so short came, short come short. What does that mean? but it really means to compromise, right? So that's kind of more idiomatic. You can't really decipher it from the part. But then you have very compositional ones, transparent meaning, such as telefon kardan, telephone do. So then that's very clear what the meaning is. And we have those in English, right? Yeah. Make a decision or take a chance, things like that. And then the question also for linguistics is how should they be represented in syntax or in the lexicon? That's probably not as relevant for teaching. But this first bullet really is what I want to focus on in here. So here's three groups, zadan, khordan, and keshidan verbs. Here's some examples where you have comb hit, right? Toothbrush hit, broom hit, whip hit, etc. And does anyone want to venture on what the common theme is here in terms of meaning? And everyone's muted, but if you want to jump in.
Striking, hitting.
Strike, hit.
It's some sort of hitting. They all involve something, right? They all involve something you're using to hit. So an instrument. This is one of the common elements here, that you're using an instrument to strike. And often this zadan in these constructions is used as a repetitive action, right? So shane zadan, you comb your hair, you brush your teeth. It's a repetitive action with an instrument that's striking. Yeah, all of those. This one, khordan. So it's not random, is what I'm trying to say, right? This one, khordan, sanma khordan, gul khordan. So deceit, eat, or deceit, collide, as you translate. Slap, collide. Beating, collide. Defeat, collide, right? Thoughts on this one?
Emotions and
To be affected.
passive.
I didn't hear the last one.
Recipients of an action or recipiency.
Yeah, it's someone who's being affected, but is it positive or negative?
It's negative, probably.
Yeah. So subject is affected negatively by these actions. And in fact, you can see some of these in English, they are passives, also passive constructions in English, if you translate them, but they are negative affected events, or yeah. And finally, I have here the keshidan group, so to pull or to drag. That keshidan, zahmat keshidan, intizar keshidan. So English is pain, pull, what is that? Effort, pull, waiting, pull, scream, pull. And I kind of mixed a couple of things together here, but really, I think waiting pull is a good example of what is this pulling expressing. This is a little bit more complex, maybe. It's harder to capture, but
Duration of time.
yeah, this is definitely duration. So it's affecting the duration. When we talk about intizar keshidan, there's a feeling of it prolonging for a while, right? There's a prolongation. Ranj keshidan, you suffer for. There's a feeling it's prolonging, or there's a duration to it. Yeah. So as you can see, and this is only subsamples, so zadan can be used in many different constructions with many different meanings, but this is just subsample of these groups and what these light verbs mean and what they bring. So having known that, just a little game here. Here's two images. Which one would you map breath pull versus breath hit, now that we know what they mean? So breath pull would be the prolongation, right, of the breath, whereas breath hit has a more repetitive feel to it, right? So which is which?
Nafas zadan.
Nafas zadan is, I'm assuming, the dog, right?
Yeah.
So nafas zadan, if we translate into English, then Nafas keshidan will be to breathe. So I'm going with the yoga person. And nafas zadan is to pant, which is going with the dog, right? There's similar things here. Dast keshidan, prolongation, versus dast zadan is a strike. And in this case, it may not be repetitive, but it's a strike still. It's a touch. So dast keshidan would be this one versus dast zadan. Or bros keshidan, bros zadan. This is a little bit more nuanced, but there's still a feeling that bros keshidan is brushing, kind of focusing on the duration, whereas bros zadan is a quick hit, right? Or repetitive hit, either one. Here's another one. So again, matching the pictures, let's say, dar ro baz kard versus dar baz shod. So door open made versus door open became is the word for word translation. For those who don't speak Persian, it basically means, well, let's first match them. So dar ro baz kard would be the second one, correct? Versus dar baz shod would be the first one. So this is open the door. He, she opened the door. Versus this one is the door opened on its own, right? So the difference here is the baz is the same, the open is the same, obviously, but the difference is the choice of the light verb, and that can make a difference in, it's a causation really, but it's showing a difference in not only the meaning, it's adding a cause. So I made the door to become open, technically is what it is. And also there's arguments, right? So you have now dar baz shod, this is the subject, if to get into more grammar here, and this is the verb, whereas here the subject is u dar ro baz kard, right? U would be the subject, and that is your direct object now with a ra. So you get an argument added in when you add the kard for it clearly, because it's adding a causation. So it's also affecting the syntax, right? Oh, I forgot I had that. So there you go. Here's a bunch of other combinations on the right. On the left is the non-causative or intransitive, and then on the right is the causative version. So gam shodan, gam kardan. These three here are with an adjective. So shodan kardan usually goes with an adjective. So you have khoshk shodan, khosh kardan, bidar shodan, bidar kardan. Here we have khordan zadan alternation, kotak khordan, kotak zadan. Again, this one is the passive version. Nejat yaftan, yaftan and dadan alternation, as well as khordan and dadan alternation. So there's a number of these, but all of these kind of follow the same idea that there is a causation added to it, or another argument added as well. So there's some patterns here that can also be used in teaching. So this is from the point of view of theoretical linguistics. These are some elements that have been identified to group the various life verb constructions together, or life verbs together, and also to determine the meaning from the parts in a way. They identify the patterns that exist. There's also work on the language acquisition side. This is work that we did with Ivan Kadri at University of Maryland, which I've talked about before, but just to illustrate that we can use these kinds of results to see how L2 speakers perform versus heritage speakers on specific tasks. This one is the compound verbs, non-causatives like shikas khordan versus shikas dadan. And they do much better with the non-causative for some reason, the L2s. So that would kind of say, okay, maybe we should focus on this aspect more because they're not performing as well on these. So leveraging the results of language acquisition to see where to focus the language curriculum for L2 speakers versus H2 heritage speakers. And there's also, here's another example of the zadan verb. We talked about the repetitive action one, but there's a lot more, as I was saying. So zadan is used with musical elements. musical instruments. So again, there's an instrument, which is the commonality here, but so in this case, it'll be to play music, to play an instrument. It's used with communication elements, but again, instrument is involved, as you can see. So new words that come in like email zadan, SMS zadan, all of those would be used with zadan, right? Definitely a pattern there. This is also communication in a way, or emission of sound. Sometimes people are describing it. So to talk, to shout, to whistle. These get more complicated, but it's to cover with. They're called locatum verbs, but they're to cover an object with something. Again, some sort of instrument involved. And finally, this real hitting and striking part, you can see here, often repetitive action. So there's different groupings that happen, and question is, can we present these groupings together to the students so that they can see the pattern and identify how to use it? So when I give them, let's say they learn telegraph zadan, email zadan, fax zadan, if I give them the SMS, that it fits in the zadan category. So you don't say SMS dodan, right? It's SMS zadan, because it fits in this category. Okay. There's also this. I just want to put this as Nilufar family has done this. Looked at each verb and created a semantic space for them in a similar way. So found all of these different kind of elements that go with zadan. I don't want to focus too much on it, but yeah, there's a lot of work on this aspect. I want to focus a little more on corpus linguistics. How much time do I have? Okay. Maybe I should go a bit faster then. So let me just jump ahead. So for corpus linguistics and natural language processing, we're using corpora to authentic text, basically, of Persian to help guide the students in discovering new things. And leveraging some of the tools that we have built for natural language processing of Persian also can be helpful. So I put here a bunch of things that I can think about. I'm sure you can think of others, but you can see, for example, specifically in the compound verbs, you can use these to see how they are used in context, in real authentic data. The students can look at them to see what nouns or adjectives each verb goes with, find the similar constructions, and then I'll show all of these new vocabulary items like SMS zadan, but like anything that comes in, new verbs or neologisms that are being created, and they're being created very fast these days. You can identify those in these texts. And of course, looking at different registers, such as not just news, but looking at downloading Twitter data and looking at those as well, for instance. So I'll give some examples. I use the Bijan Khan corpus for this, which is available for free. And so you can see, when you search for the term hort, for instance, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, but in case you're not, this is a concordancer or quick keyword in context analysis, where you can see where the word is used, but in the context. These are the elements to the right and the elements to the left within the corpus, and it finds all of them and tells you what they're. And you can see here, you can find the life verbs here. So shekast khordan here, peyvand khordan. Sorry for those who don't read Persian. Bit chash khordan, bel khordan, ja khordan, etc. So you can identify the verbs, the types of compound verbs that exist. And then collocation analysis is another thing you can do. So you can put khordan and see what, sorry, this is not khordan, this was zadan. This is with zadan, I put the wrong one here. But with zadan, you get these terms that appear a lot, like ner zadan, zang zadan, doman zadan, right? So my mistake on this, but you can identify terms that co-occur very regularly with that term. So you can see what's related to it. And then you can click on it, double click on it, and see, where, like, what is gol? Why is flower here? But no, it's talking in sports about to hit a goal, right? Gol zadan, they're all in that context. Or susu, for example, you don't know what that is, but now you can say, they can learn that we use susu zadan with stars, right? That's a verb for describe the way the stars shine. Here's another example. I did the same collocation analysis with latme, so damage, to see what kind of verbs go with a particular noun. So in this case, I have zadan and vared. So again, I can double click to see these are latme zadan, so damage hit. And again, here is also damage hit. And then there's vared. So why is that? And it's because latme vared should. So that's another way of using a construction, a compound construction. So you can, the students, perhaps more advanced ones, can discover new verbal constructions for the nouns that are being used. And one of the issues that especially heritage speakers have is identifying what preposition to use with compound verbs, but verbs in general, right? So here's one thing you can do also. You can look at the way it's used, the element that is used after it in the collocation search. And you can see that it's using the verb, the preposition be almost throughout, right? So helping in identifying subcategorization and what preposition to use with a compound verb or a eventive noun. And this is frequency analysis on light verb constructions with kardan, and this one is with dadan, so do and give. And I've used this before for coming up with what is most frequent. It's the frequency analysis, so it shows what things are frequent, and you can use that to teach, whatever is frequent in your corpus. You can use that to prioritize the kind of verbs that you want to teach the students in the class, for instance. So this is all just searching in a corpus where instead of going through and reading everything and trying to find things and write them down, this is where computational approaches can help us do things faster to improve the curriculum, to make it more focused, or to allow the students to discover new things in the text itself. And of course, everyone loves word clouds, so you can obviously do word clouds to find like main themes in a corpus or in a text, identify the difference between different ones. This one was actually a Baluchi text, Baluchi blog that I did this on. So this one is perhaps, this is where I wanted to show also where natural language processing a bit more involved, not just the corpus or concordancer approaches, but a bit more involved things that we have developed in Persian language processing can be used. So let's say the student comes here and says daman zadan, which is skirt hit, if you want to translate word for word. And like, what does that mean? So you can double click to see it within the text of where it appears. And then we can apply morphological analysis and lexical search, lexical analysis in an interactive natural language processing tool to bring up, you can click on the term and bring up the translation, hear how it's pronounced, and the analysis of it. It's a past tense verb for third person plural, let's say, right? And if you want, you can send the sentence to Google Translate and it will translate it for you automatically. Maybe we don't want that in a classroom, but this part I think might be interesting. So they can, this is for more advanced students, allowing them to move on to higher reading so they can click on words that they don't understand as they're reading through it and see what they mean. And this one also I put, I think this is more advanced as well, but you can see that dast zadand or tuhmat zadand are not always next to each other. We allow a lot of different things to appear between them, but you can do it with all of the verbs. So this is another way of looking in the text to see what kind of things can come between it, like latme ziyadi be barname zad. So it's not damage hit, but damage a lot to the program hit, right? With all these things in between. So again, understanding how these verbs can be separated from each other, but still keep that same meaning. And that's it for the kind of what I wanted to show. This is going from more introductory approaches to using corpora and natural language processing to more advanced ones. So just to kind of summarize it, the idea that I'm proposing is communication between all of us, I guess is what I'm proposing. So, and a more integrative approach, something that is bringing the different disciplines of Persian language study together and finding our insights and sharing our insights in a way that we can all communicate with each other and use it in building a Persian language teaching curriculum that leverages the insights from the Persian language acquisition, identifying where the gaps are, as well as the insights from linguistics that can identify the kind of patterns that we can leverage for teaching so that it's not just rote memorization in the classroom, but actually leveraging understanding of patterns. And then I showed some technology, basically use of technology in the classroom that can help in studying the authentic data and discovering new patterns, perhaps, that were not discussed in the classroom. And I did put here, it can be applied at all levels, but may require guidance by instructors. So I think some of these definitely need to be built as a guided activity in the classroom. I think I already mentioned all that, so I'll skip all this. But the one thing I mentioned for this slide is that that's why I took compound verbs as an example, because here's a linguistic phenomenon that all the various disciplines have really worked on, but it's something that is not really described in grammar books clearly. The insights that we have found in linguistics is not something that has been known previously. So it's a new knowledge, and it's not clear cut, even though we all know exactly which verb to use. It's not easy to explain without some look at theory. I'll finish with the challenges I see here. Obviously, it requires bringing all of us together to collaborate. That's definitely a challenge. We all work on our own things and we're all very busy, but it also means working closely with Persian language teachers and instructors to build things that are relevant to the classroom. A linguist, as a theoretical linguist, I can take things and make them simpler without jargon, but that's not necessarily going to be helpful if it's not relevant to teaching. So it requires definitely close collaboration that can address both the gaps in the L2 speakers as well as heritage speakers. And the technology should be accessible and open access, or at least not costly, so that instructors can access them. And of course, funding and time, but I'll leave it on that. Thank you. I can take questions.
Thank you very much, dear Karine, for your wonderful talk. I personally learned a lot, and I'm sure that the audience did too. So just briefly, like you mentioned, the summary of your talk, but I would like to also go through some of them so that to refresh the audience's mind if they want to ask any questions about any specific aspect that you mentioned. So compound verbs were viewed from different perspectives, as Karine said, and there are so many experimental research and formal linguistic research done on different perspectives. And then she talked about grouping compound verbs based on their pattern or based on their semantic information, compound verbs being on a continuum, very transparent or very opaque, and then in between, whatever falls in between. She also talked about the corpora, so corpus linguistics and NLP in language and classrooms, and how we can benefit from them, especially for the higher level students, higher level language classes. She talked about collocations, discovery of collocations in corpus, and a lot of other topics that were very interesting. I know that we have so many questions, but I think if you allow me, I would like to start with just a question that has been bothering me, and now that Karine is here, so I can ask her. So my question is about the semantic, like grouping. So in pedagogy, if you group, let's say, words around one semantic field, then there is a better chance that the students can memorize them, or it's a better chance of keeping them in the memory. So I was wondering how you do this, whether you group them based on their verbal element or based on their nonverbal element, because I noticed that in your examples, you showed some semantic fields that were grouped based on the verb, like shane zadan, nafas zadan, so zadan, keshidan, and khordan, I guess. And then in the other ones, you showed us nafas keshidan, nafas zadan, so you group them based on their noun. So based on the linguistic data that you have, I was wondering which one you recommend to focus on.
Yeah, I think the way I have done it is basically identifying the common patterns that can be taught most easily. So in the case of these ones, there's a distinction that is brought by changing the light verb, right? So that shows that this part is the same meaning, but it's this part that's changing the full meaning of the verb. So I think there's a lot to be found, a lot to be learned, because we do use the same noun with a lot of different light verbs. So there's, and if we can see the clear patterns and distinctions, I do go by that. So looking at it by the light verb, kind of like this, understanding what the light verb meaning is, and then see also how it affects when you have the same thing but different light verbs, that it carries over that kind of pattern. In this one, I guess the way I did it in class, actually, I have done this, is exactly what I did here. I showed these and the pattern that they express, the meaning that they bring, and then show cases where you can see clearly the distinction in those patterns that they bring, or the meaning that they bring. In these ones that are alternations, like shodan kardan, khordan zadan, I tend to put them with the, I put them together with the nominal element or the adjectival element to show this really alternation that is happening, that when you change the light verb, you get the passive form or the non-causative form or the causative form. So I think wherever I can find patterns is how I do it, basically. It's a quick answer. And if that helps.
Thank you very much. Now let's get to the questions that are in the audience, and then I go to the chat. So Sima, Professor Zolfagari, you can go first.
Thank you very much. I'm not a professor, by the way. Thank you, Karine. As usual, I'm fascinated by your work, and it's like a lion field of study for me. But from my own down-to-earth and practical Persian language teacher, I wanted to first raise a very fundamental question to all our in linguistic endeavor, and also explain one daily problem that I encounter to add more to the complexity of your work. And the fundamental question I have, when it comes with the verbs and everything, it's perfect and everything is okay. But when I noticed when you gave examples, almost all the sentences were non-spoken Persian. So I don't agree with the differences between spoken or written and non-written language, because nowadays we write the spoken language. So I always differentiate between spoken language and non-spoken language. And the examples, the sentences were mostly non-spoken language. So the language, the sentences that you don't hear and you don't speak in your daily communication. Should we consider, when that we want to explore this very important, very useful, field of research, shall we focus on spoken? Isn't it better to focus on spoken? It makes it more challenging. And one of the challenges that I can share with you is that, especially when you're teaching to non-spoken, non-Iranians who have been through marriage or, work and everything in contact with Iranians from different parts of Iran, then they are familiar with, then the dialectal variations also come in action. For example, you may want to explain to them, geriye kardan or dava kardan, but through their like Rashti or Shamali, relatives, they are familiar with dava gereftan. So that also makes it, just to give you, some practical problem. So my fundamental question actually is, because that's my concern in all the linguistic, research that we do, that we usually, that was the tradition, that we focus on non.
Should I answer this question first before you raise your other one?
That's the whole point. So thank you.
I'm absolute proponent of teaching the spoken language, obviously the conversational language, because that's mainly how we speak. Even when we're giving lectures at universities, we still use the conversational morphology and so the reason that I was showing all of these things that are very written language or ketabi language, we should say, I guess, I don't know, the formal language, is the formal register, is because I was using the Bijan Khan corpus. So, sorry, Bijan Khan corpus is basically news text that is put together. However, we have worked a lot, and natural language processing systems are there for downloading, for instance, Twitter. You can download Twitter or blogs or other, and I've done quite a bit of work on analyzing blog language, in fact. So then you can see, you can have the students look at the conversational language and do searches in the conversational language, the conversational orthography, the conversational usage of verbs. And you'll find a lot of neologisms with English, which my favorite one that I keep talking about, I always bring up as example is take a chance kardan. I love that one. The light verb construction in a light verb construction. But so yeah, absolutely. I think we should use corpus linguistics to look at real authentic text, not limited to the formal register, but also the conversational register. Absolutely. And that you can discover a lot more there. The dialectal stuff, again, if you find the corpus for it, absolutely. I don't really have access to much dialectal language, but I'm sure there's there. And that's actually a good topic to work on, to develop corpora for that. So
thank you very much for your question and your answer, Karine. Perhaps we can read another question by Professor Adel, who, after thanking you, Karine, she asked an interesting question, actually, which is maybe many of us have that question in our mind. So she says, a drawback of data-driven learning appears to be its time-consuming nature, both for the teacher in terms of material and classroom preparation, and for the students in learning to utilize a method they are likely to be familiar with, and often feeling frustrated in deciphering the meaning from individual components, plus the multiple number of concordance lines. I was wondering about your thoughts on this. So it's actually, she's asking about the practicality of incorporating linguistic methods into language teaching.
So yes, when I use corpus linguistics in classroom, I do a lot of pre-planning so that it doesn't go into a whole, down the rabbit hole on different sides. I do agree with that. This is where the challenge part of what I'm proposing comes in, of the collaboration, that first of all, that the tools be in a way that are very familiar, easy to use, friendly to use. We're using apps all over now. I think the students are very familiar in picking up apps very quickly. So it should be as user-friendly as apps are, basically. But also in terms of the content, that's what I was saying, the collaboration is helpful in that we can, corpus linguists and instructors can decide if I want to teach this particular topic or theme or grammar point, find the corpora specifically. So it's identifying the right corpus or corpus sections. And so it's identifying the right corpora so that you can limit the work and make it and guide it toward what you need for that particular course, so you don't go into a whole thing. I mean, obviously this can be used on its own for students outside of the classroom if they want, but again, if it's not really focused, it could go down a rabbit hole and not be useful at all. I totally agree. So it's a tool that we can use for helping us, but it does require identifying the corpus. And one thing I didn't mention, I should say, is if you take let's say concordances or natural language processing tools that exist right now that work specifically for English, but they're more general ones, you may be able to do some things, but there's a lot you can't do because you don't have the Persian specific natural language processing in there. So if you put Persian specific language processing incorporated within your system, and if we can build those and make them available to language instructors, then you can really focus on things that are needed for Persian language teaching. So you can say, I want to find all the light. So in this case, I was just searching for Zadan, right? I'm actually not using one that's specifically for Persian, but I could say, I want to find Zadan only in a light verb construction usage. So you have a parse of the whole sentence already. I wanted to find it in the light verb construction usage and used only with letme. So now you can only find damage, hit, constructions, and nothing else, right? You can really limit it by the way you search because it has better understanding of Persian language and the different parts of speech, different categories of words that are in there. So this is what needs to be developed, I'd say, that we don't have yet. That's part of the collaboration challenge that I'm proposing.
Thank you very
much. Question.
Thank you very much, Karine Can. So Gözde Merkan typed her question. I try to read it. So she thanks you, and then she says, I work on and teach the Turkish language at the University of Toronto, but I have many students who speak Persian as L1. While you were presenting your examples, I observed many overlaps between Persian and Turkish. For example, we also have to pull pain or to eat a shot, but there are also differences. In Turkish, there are several structures with a light verb to throw, as in to throw a scream, etc. So semantic fields overlap, but their borders may be different. This brings me to my question about cross-linguistic influence. What do you think about possible positive and negative transfer between students' languages? Do you think teachers should refer to the similarities and differences explicitly?
I do. I know there's different frames of thought here, so I don't want to get into that part of discussion on that, but I do. So I haven't obviously worked on Turkish and Persian similarities, but there is so influence from English in heritage language grammar is a big one. To point out to them that what they're using is actually an English usage and not a Persian usage. Sometimes they're shocked by it, but because it's so common to them in their minds, they're internalize it. But I do point out, yeah, this is where it's coming from. So they know, and they can see the similarities, they can see the differences and how Persian would use it different from English. I think it's, yeah, I do. I'm a linguist, so I love those things. So yes, but I'm sure there's a discussion on that among language instructors.
Thank you so much, Karine. So another question is by Professor Rafi, Mehrdad Rafi, who asks, what software technologies did you use for right-to-left parsing and for word cloud generation?
For this one, I used AntConc, AntConc, available freely. You can download it, and then you go in the global settings and set it the language direction to be right to left. Otherwise, it will be all messed up. But it doesn't have Persian specific analysis. Like it can take out like the common words, big, as, things like that, if you want to not have those in your collocation analysis, for example, or frequency analysis. But it can show this. For the natural language processing stuff, for word cloud, you said, the word cloud I did, well, there's one called wordle.net. I think it still exists. You can put your text in there and see a word cloud that's free, I think, still. Wordle.net, I think. I used a IBM software that I downloaded that also does word cloud generation for free. And the other Persian specific natural language processing stuff that I showed, like, where was that? This one, this is developed by us. And this was developed by us, but it's not freely available, but this should be. So.
Thank you very much, Karine. So the next question is by Aqsa Ijaz, who says, I have a question regarding the underlying logic determining the compound verbs in Persian. The example of yoga breathing and panting highlighted the repetitiveness of breathing in one case and not in the other. To me, both examples seem to have breathing as a repetitive action, whether in panting or in mindful breathing. Could you please help me understand this logic better?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but in general, native speakers feel nafas keshidan is more of a breathing, whereas nafas zadan is, right? To illustrate clearly. But there are differences in how native speakers feel about different verb, different meanings, interpretations. This is not a clear-cut story. So maybe I have presented it a little bit clear-cut. It's not clear-cut. There is a continuum. There is disagreements. There is elements that don't fit in these nice patterns. So those will have to be learned by heart because they're on the more non-transparent side. They're more idiomatic. But the ones that are more, that we can see patterns for, they can be learned as, groupings and patterns rather than learned by heart. But yeah, it's not a clear-cut story. I may have presented it a little bit that way, but it's not a clear-cut story because of this continuum that exists for compound verbs, and it's constantly changing, and new ones are being created every day.
Thank you so much. The next question is by Mr. Danish. He thanks you, and he says, I had a post-advanced student work with BBC Persian materials, which is full of these compound verbs. I would like to know more about the natural language processing and what sources do you use or are available. Could you also please share your resources for using technological resources for Persian?
Yeah, so I used to have a website that had all that, but I think I should launch it again. But there's also a lot, if you search for Persian natural language processing tools, there's a lot out there. But the problem is what I said before, it requires some technical knowledge to download and run and everything. And that's where the whole idea of the collaboration comes in, where we can create a suite of tools that is user-friendly, that instructors can just take and use for Persian specific teaching. So you could say, for teaching compound verbs, this is the unit to use. For teaching Ra, this is the unit to use. That kind of thing would be helpful, I think. So I already said a couple of the technologies that I use for this talk, but there's a lot more out there. There is, in terms of resources, there's a lot of corpora that has been produced in Iran on blogs. On the Bijan Khan corpus I mentioned, there's a Hamshahri corpus, which is older. There's a number of other corpora that have been created. There is a WordNet, which is basically a lexicon with links of synonyms and antonyms of Persian words that has been created, Farsi WordNet. There's a lot of tools out there, but leveraging them does require some technical knowledge. Frequency analysis is an easy one that I think can be done even through concordancers. like ant conk, like that I mentioned. So yeah, without technical knowledge, I don't know. I can, if you email me, I can make available some of the resources and tools that are available for Persian that can be used.
Thank you, Karine-Can. I think Professor Rafi has another question. Yes, you can try speaking.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. I have one question, and that is using NLP tools for frequency analysis and counting and all of that is fascinating. But at the end of the day, once the compound verb has been identified by the software or by NLP, isn't the student of the language going to need to memorize that combination word? So aren't we at the end of the day still needing to memorize these compound verbs? And I'm wondering what the utility of NLP compound verb identification is in the process of learning.
Well, if I haven't been able to convey that through this talk, then I guess I haven't been able to convey that through the talk. But I was hoping to have shown some examples. But is it still learning by heart? Yes and no. So in my experience, when I teach through pattern analysis, and again, it depends on the student, depends on the learner. Some learners love it and to find the logic instead of being told it's an exception, just learn it by heart. And some students just want to learn it by heart. Then there's that as well. So you have to adapt it to the learner's preferences as well. But it's not fully learning by heart in that you can, like I said, for instance, if I give you a new verb, if I give you a new term and say make a verb from it, that is being created, in Persian a lot, especially with loan words, then if you understand the logic behind the patterns, behind the meaning of these light verbs, you can create them. So you haven't learned it by heart, but you can create new things correctly because you know exactly which verb to use where. If you just learn things by heart, you're going to miss those things. But you're learning, you're still in, let's say, go back to here. Where's my Shanizadan stuff? Yes, you're still learning these, but it's clear what's happening and you can guess sometimes without learning by heart. If I give you a word that is an instrument that wants you to talk about something you do, a striking in a repetitive action with an instrument, I think you're going to be, oh, I know that category, it's with Zadan. So you're going to put Zadan in there, even if you haven't seen the light verb construction or learned it by heart. So I think yes, some of it you do have learned by heart, but you can also create new ones or capture new ones without having seen them before. And I think that's important. Understanding the logic instead of trying. If I see this, I think for me it's way easier to learn as a language learner than trying to learn each. Shane zadan, vase khordan, dard keshidan, all put together without any commonality between them. So I think it helps the learning process. The other question of,
No, that was it. Thank you.
Yeah, as a language teacher, I think I use that a lot, like I said, the frequency analysis. So if I have something that's Persian specific that can identify light verb constructions, not just zadan, but finding shane zadan together, latme zadan together, because it can find the light verb constructions or the compound verbs together because it's Persian knowledge in the software, then I can find which light verb constructions or which compound verbs are more frequent in our context of the domain that I'm teaching or the text that I'm teaching, and I can prioritize and make sure those are taught first. That's, I think, how I would use it, but that's just me.
Thank you, Karine. I think Professor Nahal Akbari has a question now. You may.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry about my voice. I have a bad cold. Thank you, Karine. This was great. I just wanted to follow up on that aspect of teaching it in class and memorization and what next. And this is, I think, goes back to what Karina was saying about fields coming together. So if you look at it from the language teaching aspect of things, once students have learned to identify these things, then there's a lot of ways where you can still go to your more communicative ways of language teaching and incorporate this, right? Yeah. So for example, if you give scenarios or role plays to your students, but then have them in a situation where they're supposed to use some of these actively. Right. I think that's one way. I've typically done it and I've seen results from it, that they actually have identified it first, but now they get opportunities to use it. Again, teaching and short-term learning, that's, you know, a whole other issue, and how does it impact their long-term learning of things? But at least within the means of actively using them in the classroom, I think there's many other things we can add to that at the end.
Yeah, and again, yeah, so this is the collaboration part I'm at. So as a linguist, I can say, here's the pattern. Now I'd like to sit down with a language instructor and say, how can we best fit this within your framework of teaching, communicative teaching, form-focused teaching, whatever you're doing, maybe even TPR. Actually, it would fit perfectly, this Zadan stuff with TPR. Yeah, this is where the collaboration comes in. How do we make it most useful and effective in getting this concept, this pattern across of meaning to the students, so that they can not only learn it in theory, but also start using it in a communicative method and internalize it. Yes, thank you.
I have one question, since nobody else has any more questions, maybe I can ask you about, so teaching, so as you mentioned yourself, compound verbs are on a continuum, right? So the most implicit ones, so the most idiomatic ones, do you think there is a point in actually putting them in these groupings? Because it wouldn't help. I mean, not knowing the constituent wouldn't hurt. And actually, in the experimental studies that I did on compound verb processing, it seemed that both native speakers and non-native speakers, so second language learners of Persian, both of them parse or decompose the compound verbs into their constituents. But when it came to teaching them, I thought, okay, let's try teaching them separately and then teaching them as a whole. And it seemed that it didn't have any difference. So I think because probably I chose more idiomatic compound verbs, and I was wondering if there is any benefit in teaching them the constituent meanings, or just straight on, since for the benefit of time, just go on and teach them the expression meaning.
Yeah, in some of these idiomatic expressions, it's really very difficult to find how the two parts contribute, right? It's just so idiomatic, right? But yeah, the English example always given is kick the bucket, right? Which means to die. But how do you kick bucket? How do you get from kick the bucket to die, unless you just learn it by heart as a, you know, as a lexical item? So breaking it apart doesn't really help in that case, I think, in those idiomatic expressions. If linguists haven't been able to find the pattern, I don't think we should try to teach it in that compositional approach, because it's not gonna be successful. But yeah, I still wonder sometimes about things like Del be darya zadan. You know, is that, you know, hard to see hit means to take a risk. It's idiomatic, but it's also metaphorical. So there's this whole other concept of a metaphor, right? But I think that's still is something that has to be learned by heart, because how are you going to guess that hard to see hit means to take a chance or to take a risk? Yeah, I think I personally think the idiomatics cannot be taught the same way that I'm proposing here.
Thank you, Karine. We have one more question from Sima Zolfagari. Go ahead.
Thank you, Shana. It's not a question, actually, just food for thought, or maybe a hint, because when I was working on Bakhtiyari grammar, I had difficulty for grouping some of the verbs. I couldn't find a logic to group them or categorize them in the same category, and trace them back to their Middle Persian and Parthian roots helped me a lot. So at that time, they had some, logic to be grouped together, and then they developed almost the same. Maybe, like, for example, that can be applied also to have when we see the verbs like geristan and zistan, they changed to they got kardan as the like. Maybe that also gives some ideas, why with kardan and not zadan. Maybe it's like a general tendency or something. Just I thought maybe it's also can give us some hints on the categorization of it. But I know it's adding to the difficulty of the approach and problems to involve historical linguistics also.
Yeah, yours collaborate with historical linguists also. Yes.
But thank you very much again. Yeah, it was very informative and very thought-provoking. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there is there any other question? We still have 6 minutes.
I'll just leave this, sorry for the quick thing here. I'll just leave my email there. So if you have any questions on resources and tools and wanted to contact me so I can send them to you for Persian, NLP or Corpora, please contact me there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this illuminating, thought-provoking talk and such an important subject, because I think most of us who are here we're coming from the linguistic background. So this is very sweet very close to our hearts. And I really enjoyed your talk, and I'm sure that everybody else did too. So I guess I don't know if Azita Can, would you like to talk about the next talk or?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for this engaging, inspirational lecture, and we couldn't start better than this. So I just want you all join me and somehow show your reaction in Zoom, or just upload to Dr. Megerdoomian for this wonderful talk. And I wanted to tell you that we have, as I mentioned, 2 lecture series. This is the first one. The next lecture will be on Saturday, February 11, again, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, by Professor Mahmoud Ghaffari from University of Cambridge. And the title of his presentation is Grammaticalization of داشتن. We are looking forward to see you all in February for our second talk, and I just wanted to thank you, my colleague, Professor Shabani Jadidi, for moderating and a great discussion session, and looking forward to see you all in next month. So have a wonderful weekend, and I think that in the United States it's a long weekend, and enjoy your long weekend. See you next month. Thank you so much. Bye.